Zoom will allow me to hop off your meeting and join them. So again, I got to tell you, not my preference because I'm a handshake guy, but sure seems to work out well to be around. So
Yeah.
So Kevin is my team, by the way. So he's joining us as well tonight. So
Welcome,
we have,
Kevin.
yeah,
Evening, everyone.
some
How you
of the
doing?
players.
We're still waiting for one more board member to join us so we can have our quorum and then we'll get started. So
So do you run your meetings like we do ours? If you're the last one there, you got to bring donuts next time.
no, that's a good idea though. I'm usually not the last one there and I do like donuts. So I like that combination. Okay.
Jen, you gonna be here tonight, John, or
What's that?
is Jen gonna be here, or is just Jackie?
I'm not sure. I
Okay.
was expecting Jackie for sure. So
Hmm.
there we go. We're going to be full strength here in a minute. Evening, Jackie.
Hello.
All right. Thank you. All right. We have a quorum of the board now in attendance. So I will call the March 11th regular meeting of the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District to order. The first item of business is setting the meeting agenda. Mike, anyone, are there any additions, removals from the, yes, item F under new business, the Clean Water Fund Grant O&M Assurance. So we will deal with that issue as the last item under new business. Any other additions or changes?
None that I'm aware of, Mr. President.
Okay, then a motion to approve the agenda as changed is in order.
I'll make
I'll
that
make-
motion.
I'll second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. I'll call the roll. Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. All right, the first item under new business, permit 21-001, the Timber Ridge 2 variance request.
Mr. President, managers, before the board this evening is the variance request as outlined both in the staff memo, the engineer's memo, as well as the required component by the applicant himself. And thank you, Mark, again for being available this evening to talk to the board in person. So really, the variance is quite simple. It is the main part of the project is meeting the district's rules and standards and such. So this is related to a small island, and we can between really what would be the Timber Ridge 1 and Timber Ridge 2 area, connected via, I think a a kind of a pier, floating pier or something. I don't know what that is, but that's I think a component that's being discussed within the TEP. But our role is really just to look at the island itself. And so we've discussed this with the applicant, and so Mark has made some adjustments based on a couple of calls that I've made with him. So from that standpoint, just trying to anticipate the board's expectations and potential questions. But again, this is really, for the board. We're not trying to assert a staff position in the memo at all, but rather just provide you with the information needed to make an informed decision. So I don't know from that if there's any other specific questions, or if Mr. Lambert wants to speak to that component. I guess we can proceed from here.
Yeah, Mr. Lambert or Kevin, do you want to address the variance?
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yes.
perfect.
Yes, thank you.
I want to compliment staff and Greg for helping us walk through all of the nuances of this permit application. I guess I don't want to say if you get credit for anything, you sure find difficult sites, Mark. But if you find anything, you sure find difficult sites. We have 18 acres, and obviously we have a pretty good buffer perimeter around the entire site. With that said, with the help of the City Council, with the help of the Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District, and also the LGU now on a small replacement issue, I think we've done a tremendous job of navigating all of the natural buffers that we have here to create one heck of a nice site. And the one last little item that came up as we were nearing the final brush strokes on our application was a comment back that just said, oh, gee, by the way, we see you've got a trail over on what the previous owner called Butterfly Island. Literally, it is seeded with butterfly grasses and has a little trail out to it. We see that you have a trail there, and therefore, by our rules, we have no choice but to impose a 25-foot setback around the entire island. And essentially what that does is takes and almost consumes the entire island. I've got a slide I could either send to Mike, if Mike, you'd be the one to send it to, or I could try to share it. But essentially the exception ate the rule. And so I said, Mike, I can't do that. Our hope is to have a little bit of kind of nature native type space out there. And if I put buffer signs up and say, don't enter into, 3/4 of the whole island, we've kind of lost the purpose out there. And so after some deliberation, we came up with the idea of submitting a variance. We initially asked for 5 feet, based on the fact that the exception was going to swallow the rule. Mike had called and staff had called, and we talked through and basically ultimately made the entire area below this trail a buffer area. So I think we found a great solution. Frankly, members, my preference would have been just for maybe the staff or the board to say the buffer didn't belong in the island in the first place, because we aren't building a building out there. We aren't, running the bulldozers out to grade the site. So I kind of felt maybe when we got the 25-foot imposition, that was maybe a little much anyway. But with that, we're team players. We submitted the application, and we're simply asking you to bless the variance to let us have that space below the trail area as buffer, and the rest be usable as kind of a native butterfly island.
Is it possible to share that photograph that he has? Or
Sure,
picture,
Mike,
whatever it is?
who's sharing screens right now?
Is it this? It'll take a
We-
second to come up. Is this the image
Yeah,
you're
there would be
talking about?
two things. We could either show the aerial photo like on a Google map, or else we could show the piece that's in the variance request, the exhibit.
Mike, are you able to share your screen?
Yeah, staff is working on it right now, so we'll get it up here. So,
Yeah, I've got a couple things up on the screen. Maybe there's a big delay. I have,
there it is. Yep.
There, it's
okay, I
coming.
have both the
Yep.
PDF or the aerial available, whichever you'd prefer.
So Mike, I've got 2 PDFs. Who should I send these to?
You can send them to me, and I'll shoot them over to Jessica.
Okay,
But-
Otherwise, my
Yeah,
email
are you
is at
able-
the
are
bottom of
you-
the slide here.
okay,
Right.
I just pushed them to you, Mike, so, but let's see that screen that you just had up.
Which one? Do you want the aerial or would you like the PDF?
No, let's take the aerial. That's probably a good introduction, and then the other one had the actual butterfly drawing, I think, as submitted, so.
Mhm.
You know, you'd think after a year of sharing screens, we'd have it down, but it's more challenging than you think.
Takes time.
Well, that's, let's see, that's, well, let's go with the next one. Well, here, I'll just quickly,
PDF works best, I think.
Yeah, do you have the PDF?
Yeah, that's the one that shows what's going on.
Well, otherwise, this is the island.
Yeah, just point it out in this graphic.
Right there.
There you go. Perfect.
Mhm.
Okay. And just a quick question. So the remainder of the island inside of the perimeter of the path, will that be, that will be seeded with grass or something? It will not be hard surface. Is that true?
That's correct. And that was our representations to Mike on the variances, that we would agree that we wouldn't impact any of the buffer below the trail, and that we wouldn't add any impervious surface. Anything would be pervious that we add.
Okay. So it's essentially the entire island is pervious when you're done.
Right. Do we have that PDF that we can pull up?
Was
So
up
Mark,
there
is this-
before.
Mark, is this south of your current project that you just completed a couple years ago?
This is north of the current project. I do
Okay.
have. Do we have that PDF of the island? Or
Yep,
Mike?
well, I'm
Coming.
working on it. Just a
Yeah,
little bit.
Yeah,
You
and
had it up
Mike,
before.
Is it
I
this
just
one?
sent you.
Yeah, that one.
There
Yep, that's
you
it.
go. Woo-hoo.
So everything in the crosshatched area is buffer. Everything in the center unmarked area would be grass or some sort of pervious element. And then the trail is a wood chipped, but it's not hard surface. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So that would be pervious as well.
That's correct.
Okay. Questions from the board then about the variance?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Jackie.
The footbridges are to be built. They're not there currently, correct?
Well, actually, no, they are there. There is a footbridge there now. It's a dock extension.
Mhm,
It's frankly a dock that the old owner had put in out to the island.
mhm.
And we'll have a small extension on either side because there has been a little adjustment in the wetlands since he put the dock in.
Mhm.
I did talk to Ben Meyer from Bowser, and he had indicated that those docks are perfectly fine in the wetlands, and they are a legitimate use to access those upland areas.
Okay. So the new one would be the one at the top then, correct?
The new one would be the one to the south. Our Timber Ridge
south, okay.
project is headed.
Oh, that
the
says
south.
existing. I see it now.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And then you're using wood chips for the walking path, is that correct?
Yes, that's what we've done with the other trails that we've created.
Okay, and there's no damage to that entering into the wetland?
No, our intent is, I suspect we wind up either bringing it over during the winter months when it's
Mhm.
frozen, or we would wheelbarrow them across the dock system. But we wouldn't obviously be running anything through the wetland.
No, I'm talking about as they're being used, because that stuff, kind of slips all over the place when the rains come. So I'm
Oh.
asking that of Mike, of staff, is there any danger of those wood chips mixing in with the wetland?
Well, I know that it's a very common practice with the city of, I guess Prior Lake would be my most extensive experience. They had several miles of wood chip trails around water features. And well, I guess maybe the one thing that we would probably recommend, or if the board wanted to include, is that it would not be colored, that we would just use natural local chips that are available. So they would be no different than, from that standpoint, any of the hardwood vegetation that's out there now, that if it naturally decayed and such. So
So it would be hardwood, not cedar, correct? Cedar chips?
Well, it would be just, I mean, chances are it would be a mix of
Mhm.
locally sourced, and these tub grinders they do not differentiate between the species of trees. It very well might be some cedars and mixed hardwoods and softwoods and things like that, but
Okay, well, if there's anything to specify on that material, then we'll want to make sure that we specify that on the variance. Only use this type and so forth, so that it doesn't harm the wetland. That's all I'm talking about here. And then the other question I had was, by putting the footbridges here and making it amenable to walking and you're not going to have any benches, it said in your application. So you're not really encouraging people to linger on the island, but just to walk around it and enjoy the nature. And so my question was on introducing people and animals and the waste that generates. Is that going to be an issue? How is that dispenser for pet waste going to be emptied?
We actually have pet trails on our existing Timber Ridge development,
Mhm.
and we monitor those daily. We provide the pet bags, and thankfully, our pet owners are pretty responsible. It's very seldom that we have somebody either leave a bag or leave some waste. So,
Yeah.
the beauty of what I see with this development is it's immediately north of ours. We're designing it to be more or less a contiguous type development. So, frankly, I'm excited to have this as an amenity for our residents to be able to kind of cross between the two buildings and stop along the way. And obviously, with any good developer, we take care of our properties. And so I think you'll find that this will be well maintained.
Mhm. Yeah, and you understand why I'm asking questions.
Sure.
So do you have these pet waste dispensers anywhere else?
I do. I have them in Arbor Ridge and I have them in Timber Ridge.
Okay.
They're,
Alright.
in fact, you know what? I just wrote a check today for $276 to whatever supply company it was for pet waste bags.
Okay. Okay. Good.
So,
And
so
so,
I will tell you, we use them.
okay, and so any material that gets away from people on windy days and that kind of thing, you're also monitoring?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
And especially during construction time, that's the time I'm most frustrated with, when you have the construction debris rolling around in the wetland. I mean, it's our property, and
Yeah.
frankly, these wetlands are going to make beautiful vistas, as they did with Timber Ridge 1, Timber Ridge 2. All these units will look out onto this wetland. We obviously want to take care of it and make it look nice.
Well, and that was going to be my next statement, is that the wetland itself is a beautiful amenity. And so when you're creating an opportunity for people to trek out into the wetland areas with their pets or their children or whatever it is, you just want to make sure that whatever waste occurs from that activity doesn't stay there and doesn't impact the wetland.
Exactly.
Because even without this, like you just said, it's a beautiful amenity all by itself. And so our job is just to protect that natural amenity. And you did a nice job on your first properties. And so with the kind of activity that you have for maintenance, it sounds like this is going to be well maintained. My only comment then past this is that at some point in the future, the district's talked about having signs in wetlands, just educating people on how important they are for water quality. And is that something that you would be amenable to in the future when we get to that point?
Yeah, Mike had actually raised that with me, and I'm certainly happy to do that. Again, I think we've got a great opportunity to make something special out here, and
Mhm.
I know every now and then you have a little bit of PR money or grants that are available for these types of things. And so, again, I'm a good neighbor for Forest Lake, good neighbor for Comfort Lake, Forest Lake Watershed District, and always happy to help.
All right, thank you.
Steve,
That's
any
it for me.
questions? Okay, thanks, Jackie. Steve, any questions from you?
No, I'm ready to move that we accept the variances as stated.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Any other discussion on Chuck?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just, well, two things. One comment regarding the signage. Part of the buffer rule is a requirement for signage simply indicating the buffer boundary
Right.
every 200 feet or so. So that's that will be part of this. Then the only other question I had was that there was a brief discussion about the nature of the wood chips, colored versus not. Manager Anderson made a comment,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure whether there was a suggestion of any specification of that as part of this approval.
Well, we should discuss that just maybe a minute more with Mike. Is there a need? The point in asking that question on my part was just to determine if there were any restrictions that we should be mindful of in the choice of materials. And if there isn't any, then there's no need for that statement. So I just asked Mike one more time, do we need to specify the type of wood chips or exclude a type of wood chip?
Well, I think just I mean, obviously, people are willing to spend more for colored wood chips for landscaping and other such, but I'm not, I'll admit, intimately familiar with the dyes that are used, but it is an artificialing process that they're spraying to dye the wood chips. So it would seem that it's not something we would want on the edge of on a wetland buffer. And there's plenty of available wood chips available that, I mean, even the city of Forest Lake, when they have a contract and they truck out semi-loads of material, multiple times a year. I don't know if they make any of that available or not. But I think that there would be plenty. So again, I don't know if any of our ecologist staff at EUR or others are familiar with the dyes used in that, but I would think that it would be easier. Okay, Mr. Lambert, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just accept the comment that if you wanted to incorporate it, that it would be a non-dyed wood chip.
Yep, I was just going to
Mark, what have you used on your other properties? You said you had wood chips before. Are those just natural wood chips?
I think those are natural wood chips as well, to be honest with you, but I don't know for sure.
Okay.
I don't think we specifically went on watercolor, but I don't.
No.
I couldn't tell you that.
But
But I'd
if-
be happy to say non-dyed wood chip if that would.
Okay.
make
That's
it-
fine. That sounds good to me.
So
We-
Steve, are you agreeable to that addition to your motion?
Yeah, I am, sure.
Okay,
There's a list of conditions that are part of the motion that's
Mhm.
suggested. So if we just add that as another condition into the motion, that should be sufficient, correct, Chuck?
Yes, Mr. Chair, if the motion made is the recommended motion, and we'll just add to that the wood chips will not be dyed.
Right. Right.
so
Okay.
that's your new motion, Steve?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, I'll call the roll. Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. The variance is approved.
Thank you.
All right, the next item on the agenda then is the permit for Timber Ridge 2, the permit itself.
Right, I guess I'll jump in here. Jessica, if you would mind pulling up the figure for the overall development.
There we go.
Thank you. So, Mr. President and managers, this is permit 21-001. Like we just discussed, this is just north of the existing Timber Ridge development, and this one's Timber Ridge 2 on the west side of Everton Avenue. They're proposing a couple apartment buildings, 3 garages, and then a storage shed. Stormwater will be treated with 3 large infiltration basins. Those are the pink areas on the figure. Pre-treatment will be provided prior to discharge to those from some, I think, rain guardian turrets, kind of a, what am I trying to say? It's kind of an off-the-shelf thing you can buy, and then also sump manholes to capture sediment before discharge to those infiltration areas. The soils are good for infiltration here, so they did go with infiltration instead of, we often see biofiltration in Forest Lake, but these are true infiltration, and that will basically pretty much contain the 2-year event on site with very little discharge and match pre-development rates for the 2, 10, and 100-year event. For the buffer areas, so the green is the wetlands, which you can see kind of surrounds the whole site there, and then the purple area is the required buffer. The required buffer width is 25 feet, but we do allow averaging under the district rules, so it varies from 12.5 feet up to 50 feet, but when you average that all out, it does meet the district buffer requirements. Another key feature of this site, maybe I'll circle it here so I can highlight it, is where they have this crossing here of the wetland under existing conditions. There's kind of a small ditch that runs through there, and so they needed to provide equivalent capacity there to ensure that we didn't have any water levels or flooding concerns upstream of that. So they put in twin 24-inch pipes to ensure that kind of the hydraulic capacity would be matched there. And in terms of erosion control, they have all the standard erosion control with silt fences, rock construction entrances, inlet protection, revegetation specifications. So yeah, besides the variance request, the main site all meets the district's rules, and I'm recommending approval with the conditions in the engineer's report. So we've got approval of the variance, which managers just did. The stormwater pollution prevention plan needs to be submitted before the permit is issued. Planting plan for Butterfly Island meeting requirements of District Rule 4.5.2. So I know Mr. Lambert said that this is potentially already planted with some native grasses. So if that's the case and they want to submit documentation to that, that's fine. Otherwise, if there is invasives out there, then they need to replant that with some native vegetation. And then we just want to see a copy of their joint application affecting water resources. Basically, because they have that crossing of the wetland, there is a little bit of wetland impact there, not a whole lot, but we will want to see documentation that that's been addressed. And then kind of our typical operations and maintenance plans and buffer declarations and financial assurances. And I will open it up to if there's any questions.
Any questions for Greg or Mr. Lambert or Kevin?
No questions.
All right, then a motion to approve the permit with the recommendations as Greg laid them out is in order.
I'll make the motion to accept permit 21 or approved permit 21-001 with the conditions as listed.
And I'll second that.
All right, motion's been made and seconded. Any other discussion? All right, I'll call the roll. Manager Anderson?
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz?
Aye.
Manager Spence? Aye. Thank you, Mr. Lambert. Thank you, Mr. Shakel for joining us this evening. And thank you for working with the district to get this all pulled together.
Board members, staff members, everybody, thank you so much. Look forward to working with you. This should be a very, very nice project. Another pride for the watershed district. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.
Right. All right, next item on the agenda is the 2021 Water Monitoring Plan.
Mr. President, managers, Blaine is here this evening, and also I see Rosie's here. We're going to make an introduction as well. So I don't know if Blaine, you want to take it away?
Sure. Jessica, could you please bring up the couple of slides for the monitoring plan? All right, Mr. President, managers, just want to take a few minutes to introduce the monitoring plan for 2021. To present to you a little bit of background before we get into the elements of the plan. We have a 3-year rotation on the diagnostic monitoring by Lake Management District. And this is, we've got 2 3-year rotations, so 6 years total. So in 2018 and 19, we did diagnostic in the Little Comfort and Comfort Lake Management District. Last year, we did diagnostic in the Bone Lake Management District. And this year we're proposing diagnostic in the Forest Lake Management District. And then in 2022, we would return to the Little Comfort area, and that would end at the 6 years of that cycle. The schedule calls for a 3-year break and then starting back up in 2026 with Bone, moving to Forest Lake in 27, and then to Little Comfort in 28. So that's the proposed schedule moving forward. I'd also like to note that we have our CAT, our Citizen Assisted Tributary Program, that coincides with the diagnostic. It basically supplements some of that data and expands that data set, getting at some of those smaller tributaries or culverts. So we've got the CAT program scheduled for Forest Lake this year. We did it last year in Bone Lake, and it coincided with that diagnostic effort. And then I'd also like to mention that our DIY, or staff-led diagnostic monitoring program, is done in the year previous to the EOR's diagnostic their efforts, basically helping to inform that diagnostic effort. So this year we're proposing to do the DIY monitoring in the Comfort Lake Basin along the Sunrise River. We'll talk about that a little bit more moving forward. I'd also like to note that the Comfort Lake diagnostic update, which I know some of the managers have been eagerly awaiting, should be included in the March 25th board packet, and then a presentation on April 28th. So it's been a while getting that together. Apparently it's a very large document at this point, over 130 pages. So that will be coming shortly. This information in that will help to inform some of the projects that are currently underway in the Comfort Lake Management District, such as work on the tax forfeit wetland, and then some of the recent grants that we're applying or finishing up applying for or securing, which would be the Heath Avenue wetland enhancement and the school Little Comfort Channel wetland stream channel complex restoration. So that information should be available fairly shortly. So wait on that. Megan will be presenting that on the 8th. So that kind of sets us up for the discussion of the different elements of the monitoring program. If I could see the next slide, please. All right, so we'll go through each element, starting with the Citizen Assisted Lake Monitoring Program, or a CAMP program. We've got 7 lakes again this year, 9 if you include all 3 basins of Forest Lake. You got Bone, Comfort, Forest Lake, 3 basins, Keewatin, Little Comfort, Moody, and Second Lakes. We've got volunteers in place for the majority of these lakes already. It's a few more that we're still working on right now, but for the most part, that program is ready to go. I know Garrett's been reaching out to volunteers and getting supplies ready. And again, this is run through Met Council and directed by staff. This year, a bit of a change is that district will, we're proposing that the district staff leads the lake monitoring program. This will be a considerable cost saving to the district. Last year, EOR ran the program, district staff assisted. So we were there learning how to do the lake monitoring, assisting on each time that we went out, that the program occurred. So staff assisted in 2020. We now have most of the equipment, and it would be easy transition for staff to take over that work. It's basically an extension of CAMP and supplements the CAMP data. So we're using the same CAMP protocols, but we're also doing some additional monitoring, which would be 1 visit per lake per month. And that would be to collect a depth profile and bottom water sample. So we'd be doing that on all 15 lakes, including the CAMP lakes. And then on the 8 non-CAMP lakes, we would be running the CAMP protocol once a month. So again, it would be supplementing that CAMP data and then having the CAMP process or monitoring protocol on the non-CAMP lakes. Those non-CAMP lakes include Shields, Birch, School, Fourth, Nielsen, Lent, Elwell, and Twin Lakes. So that's the lake monitoring program. We're also proposing a few buoys on Forest Lake to assess internal loading. And this work would be accomplished by the St. Croix Watershed Research Station. Basically what the buoys are submerged anchor lines that collect continuous lake depth profiles. This helps to monitor the mixing events in the lakes and determine the extent of internal loading. So coincide, or the data sets will be combined with the PaleoCore monitoring that's being done by the St. Croix Watershed Research Station, and it'll really inform the loading, internal loading within the basins of Forest Lake, determining if we have internal loading issues and if we do need to do some of an alum treatment in one or several of the basins. So that work is proposed here as well. We're also doing effectiveness monitoring this year. EOR is doing that work. This is project effectiveness monitoring. We'll be looking at the Shields Lake Stormwater Reuse Project. This will be the second year of that data collection. And then we're also looking at 2 iron enhanced sand filters within the Comfort Lake Management District. First being the Broadway iron enhanced sand filter. This was last monitored in 2013, between 2013 and 2015. We'll be checking in on this project again, assessing if the media within that filter needs to be refreshed or replaced, and then also looking at the effectiveness of that filter treating phosphorus, and also potentially looking at if it has the capacity to take additional stormwater from the downtown area. So we'll be looking at that, and the other iron enhanced sand filter we'll be looking at is the Target Big Box iron enhanced sand filter. Next slide, please. So EOR will also be doing stream monitoring again this year. We'll be looking at 8 long-term stream sites. These are the sites that we've been monitoring since 2004. This is essentially trend monitoring for the streams within the district. Got a robust data set here. We'd like to keep on adding to it so we can kind of see trends in the district. 4 of these long-term sites inform changes in loading along the Sunrise River in the Comfort Lake Management District. These sites include the Forest Lake Outlet, the Sunrise River at Greenway Avenue and at 256. So this is upstream and downstream of Shallow Pond. And then also the Comfort Lake Inlet on West Comfort Drive. So this again looks at loading to Comfort Lake. The other long-term sites, or ISCO sites as we refer to them, are the Bone Lake Inlet and Outlet, the Comfort Lake Outlet, and the Little Comfort Inlet. And again, this will be led by EOR with district staff assisting basically with O&M on those pieces of equipment. They take a lot of maintenance to keep them running, swapping out batteries, making sure that everything is clean and running well and programmed. So we'll be doing that again, similar to last year. The other 2 programs, which I mentioned earlier, are the Citizen Assisted Tributary or CAT monitoring and the DIY or Do-It-Yourself Diagnostic Monitoring. So again, the CAT program coincides with the EOR's diagnostic monitoring effort. Again, this will be on Forest Lake. Last year, we did Forest Lake East Basin, and we're hoping to expand that into Middle Basin this year if we get enough volunteers and get the program rolling. So that will help inform and supplement some of the data from the EOR's diagnostic effort. And then the DIY effort will be again on the Sunrise River between Forest Lake and Comfort Lake. And we'll be looking at all the tributaries and inputs into that system. I went out on Wednesday during the storm event and started capturing some of those samples. So we've got 17 sites identified. A few of them didn't really work out, but we've got around 10, 12 sites that we'll be monitoring throughout the season. So these are the basic elements of the 2021 monitoring plan. EOR has a scope of work for their monitoring efforts, their aspects of the monitoring program for this year for the board to consider. And I believe there's a resolution or a motion that could be made regarding that scope of work. If there are any questions at all, I'd be happy to answer them. And Rosie Russell's here as well from EOR. She's be involved with the monitoring program as well, be out collecting some of the data and organizing staff to do the monitoring. So we'd be happy to answer any questions that you all might have.
I have 2 questions. that a go, John?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. I had a lot more, but I'd forgotten we were going to be on a rotation cycle, so that took away a whole bunch of questions right there. But if we look at this map, if Jessica can just blow that up a little bit,
If you go to the first slide, it's quite a bit larger.
yeah, that'll help. I'm really curious why we're not monitoring in two spots. One is Pine. You mentioned all these other small lakes, but Pine never gets mentioned. And on one of the maps in I think this presentation, it shows a clear line between Pine, Fourth, and then down to Moody. So have we monitored that? And if you don't have the answers, just get back to me on them. Have we ever monitored that to see what kind of inputs are coming in from that Pine Lake area? And then we've talked in the past about doing some monitoring at the inlet to Big Comfort, just to see exactly what is coming in from Little Comfort. And I've not heard if that's actually been done. Maybe that's part of the diagnostic study update for Comfort Lake that's coming. So if you can check on those two things.
I think I could jump in on the Pine Lake. So Pine Lake, my recollection is there really isn't much for open water there. I think it's more of a large wetland basin, if I recall correctly. And I do think we did do some monitoring on that tributary coming out of there during one of those original Moody Lake diagnostic reports. But I think there also just wasn't a whole lot of flow. But that does go down through Fourth Lake, and what we've seen coming out of Fourth Lake is quite clean. So
Okay.
likely what's coming out of Pine is as well. But
Okay.
I'm sure Rosie or others could look into that a little bit more and see if it would be possible to get some samples on Pine Lake itself. But that's
Well,
my
we don't
recollection.
have to do it if we don't need to, but I just don't recall any information ever coming out of that area.
Sure.
So if you have a citation that you can give me, that would be good. But don't do it if you don't need to. And then the Little Comfort to Big Comfort, so that we're monitoring exactly what's coming out of Little Comfort into Big Comfort. Has that ever been done? That's the second question.
I think I can jump in on this one. I know that we started doing a couple of sampling or a couple of samples at that under 61. Is that what you're referring to? That culvert that goes from
Highway.
yes, Highway 8. Yeah. So I know that when folks were doing the lake sampling, they did take a couple of samples for that, but it was later in the season, so we didn't get as many. I don't know if that's in the plan, and maybe Blaine could answer that for this year's lake monitoring.
Okay. Well, I didn't see it. That's why I brought it up.
Yeah,
But we're waiting on a couple of reports from the Comfort Lake management area, so maybe it'll be included in that.
I can make sure to bring up the Little Comfort to Comfort samples when we start really planning out the lake monitoring, and we can pick up a few of those to supplement anything that was done in years past.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think grabbing some samples there is good, but any sort of like long-term monitoring is really not feasible with how that culvert is essentially underwater and how those lakes are connected. So, but I do think it definitely would be, when there's clearly flow going from one direction to the other, to get some samples there would be a good thing to do, but it doesn't work as a long-term monitoring site.
Yeah, Mr. President, Manager, I would just note that as well, from just a safety standpoint, you really need to be from the boat when they're doing the lake monitoring, approach the culvert and take the sample. And I guess maybe on the Comfort Lake side, probably be most efficient and safest, and we would probably be there more frequently.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Blaine or Rosie or Greg? Steve?
Yeah, I have a few. I know we're gonna be doing some monitoring on Forest Lake to look at the water quality between lakes 2 and 3. And I'm wondering, are those below the water, or is there any chance of those being damaged? Because I think I mentioned this before, we have, those light buoys out every year, we put them out, and every year they get damaged within the first couple of months. So if it's above the water, people are gonna run over it. So I just wanna check on that, because I hate to see our experiment get terminated because we couldn't finish it. So is that below the water where it won't be hit by boats, or could you elaborate on that, Blaine, a little bit?
Sure. It is a buoy, but the actual monitoring equipment is approximately 6 feet under the water surface, and then it's anchored to the bottom. So it's a series of probes attached to a line that goes down to the bottom every meter or so. So it's recording, I believe, dissolved oxygen and temperature at each one of those meter increments. So that there's a chance that a boat could hit the buoy, but I don't believe that would damage any of the instrumentation on that buoy line.
Is there any possibility you could put a sign on there that says, test site, please do not disturb? I know when we do our water treatments, they put those little orange buoys out, they're just water bottles painted, but people tend to stay away from that area when they see that. So just a suggestion, because if something's going to go wrong, it's going to go wrong, I'll guarantee you. Plus, we can do everything we can to protect it. So just a thought.
No, that's a great idea.
I couldn't tell, I'm looking at your chart, your map here for your monitoring sites. And one of the areas, as you know, I'm interested in is the Parsons wetland. And are we all monitoring that outlet into the Forest Lake or not? I couldn't tell. It looks like it might be Forest Lake 21, but that also could be the upper part above the North Shore Trail. So I couldn't tell whether Forest Lake 21 was that, or whether it was further closer to the peninsula.
Rosie, are you familiar with that site?
No, I'm not familiar with that site. I could bring it up on a map, but I haven't been to that site yet.
Okay.
I think we should be monitoring, at least doing some testing this year on that Parsons outlet, because you're not going to be able to sample it on the lakeside because the pipe's underwater that delivers. But you can do it on the upper side because it flows directly into the pipe and it's marked clearly. You can get down there on your hands and knees and get a sample pretty easily, or you can put the logger model right there before the outlet. It's now pretty well protected by the city. They put in some posts.
Okay.
To protect the
I
outlet.
assume that is one of the monitoring sites. If it is not, I can verify if it is or not. If it is not, we could definitely pick it up with the cat monitoring.
Or I'd be willing to do it myself, because I just love, I'm one house away from there. So every time it rains, I can be out there easily. Leave it.
Okay.
I just think we should at least do some sampling on that, I think. And then the other question I had is based upon comments over the years about the bay, where you've got Forest Lake FL7 sampling. I can't tell whether that goes into the bay or is that some other sampling spot. I'm talking the bay off of Lake 1 on the south side.
Yeah, I honestly have not been out to all of these sites, so I'm not familiar with that one in particular. Rosie, are you aware of that site? Do you know where that flow path is by chance?
Mr. President, managers, if that's the one that we did previously, so there's that channel that comes in, but there's a discharge point right off the golf course. It's a little channel, and then so that's where EOR was previously monitoring for the diagnostics several years ago. There would be, and 7 would be a corollary. There's it would not, let's see, how would I, if we have a map up or not. But anyway, there's that FL7 and FL8. They both are on the golf course side of the, from a topographics standpoint. So the flow is toward the north, and it goes into that little finger that then discharges out into Second Lake.
Okay, so you're really not monitoring anything that goes into the bay. And, you know, over the years, we've had a number of complaints. In fact, I think you might have been out there once before, Mike, about blue algae forming on the east side of that bay, about halfway in. And I can give you the address. And I'm just wondering if we got green algae forming down there. You know, if you think back on Lake 3, Third Lake Pond, that's how we started there, right? With the green algae problem. So it could be a septic tank or septic tanks that are leaking or haven't been restored or something like that. But there's something going on down there. And I can ask the people to report again this year if they see it, to call in. But, you know, we've had a number of complaints about that area. And so something's going on down there. I'm not sure where it's coming from. So.
Yeah, an address location would be great. We could, you know, that could be part of the DIY or work that Blaine and the staff are working on.
Well, I can ask them to actually also call in when they see the problem again, so we can be out there and see it firsthand, and then kind of backtrack to where it's coming off the hill. The slope is pretty steep there. It's almost, you know, it's really steep. It goes up to maybe 40 feet, 50 feet high. So, okay, those are, let's see if they have any other questions here. That's pretty much it. Looks like a good program.
I guess the only question I had was just clarification. So the total cost, including staff and EOR, was for the work was $168,784, but the budget was $271. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, great.
The staff hours to implement the CAT and DIY and the lake monitoring are not included in that 106 or 160 total.
Okay, so it'll be higher than 168, but it'll be within the budget. We have 62,000 it looked like for staff management and coordination time. So, okay.
Just one other quick question, a clarification question. On page 2 of the report, second paragraph, the last 2 sentences there, it talks about that the estimated staff hours of 24 hours per month will be needed for lake monitoring, double the lake monitoring staff hours expended in 2020. Should that be half? Because you're talking right after that, you're talking about saving hours, but yet you're talking about doubling the hours required, when in fact your generalized statement sounds like you're going to save half the time. So I was a little confused by that statement in terms of what you're trying to communicate there.
Yeah, sorry for that confusion. The savings come from the monitoring being done exclusively by district staff. So we would cut out any costs that we would incur from EOR. Last year, one district staff person went out with one EOR staff person to implement that program. So that would be half the amount of time. This year we'll double that with 2 district staff people going out together for safety reasons and to assist with monitoring. So we'll double the staff hours, but because we will not be hiring EOR to do that work, we can do it more cheaply, essentially.
Yeah, maybe a clarification statement in case somebody has the same problem I had with that. This doesn't add up.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions for Blaine or Rosie or Mike? All right. Then we have a couple of proposed motions. One is to approve the monitoring plan.
I'll make the motion to approve the monitoring plan as discussed and presented.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any other discussion? I'll call the roll. Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Smaltz,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. All right. The second motion is to authorize, well, it's there. Does someone want to make that motion?
I'll make motion number 2
All right.
as presented.
And I'll second that.
All right. Motion's been made and seconded. Any other discussion? We'll call the roll. Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Smaltz,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good job. All right, next item is the AIS treatment cost share to lake associations. Discussion about this program by Chisago County, it sounds like.
Mr. President, Manager Garrett is here this evening to go over that item.
Okay.
Yes, can everyone hear me?
Yep, gotcha.
All right, perfect. So I believe at last meeting, one of the board members after I had left requested that a discussion be held about the cost share program that Chisago Lake Improvement District has, and how that might potentially be implemented into our own program. You may have received my email from earlier, which I apologize for the last minute email, but I did was able to get some information from Susanna over at the county, and essentially their cost share program works in that they have a set amount, $30,000, I believe, and they have, it looks like 3 lake associations that are able to apply for those grants. These grant monies are only to be spent on AIS management that improves, looks like, navigation for watercrafts. And the grant amounts are calculated based off the littoral area, and they get a percentage out of that, and then that percentage is taken out of the 30,000. And with that, so about as much as I was told. And then we also included some past information about EWM management that I believe Emily or Mike put together. That goes through kind of the pros and cons of the district taking on that work. So I'll leave it up to discussion then.
Well, I don't think this was ever the district taking over anything. It was to make available funds through our cost share program.
Right.
And we had, buffers at one time, rain gardens, and that morphed into a small plant grant kind of a program. So we really don't have anything in that space anymore. But there's, I think, a shifting occurring that AIS treatment is very important to our stakeholders. And most of this has been done by the lake associations on their own. And so this is an opportunity for our district to discuss whether we want to support that activity through a grant program. And so it's nice to see what Chisago County's doing, but there's many others that are doing more robust programs than this. And we have active lake associations, so I think we're missing an opportunity to support that activity. So I'd like to see it more robust, and my own little calculation here was to use the calculation of the 2 lakes that are next to Forest Lake. Forest Lake's the giant, of course, but they're both about 220 acres in size. And so if we use that as the criteria, we could offer a grant program up to $10,000 for lakes at 220 acres or less. And then Forest Lake, their opportunity would be much bigger, obviously, because their lake is much bigger. So for every 200 acres of Forest Lake, they would get an opportunity for that same amount of money. And that could be for them up to about $120,000 a year.
I guess I'm a little confused because our AIS program, I think is excellent the way it is. We're doing most of the work. And if you look at what Chisago City's doing, they have absolutely no control over how this material is dispensed. They do no delineation either before or after. They have no follow-up evaluation of how effective it is.
Mhm.
And I just think it's so much farther behind than what we're doing.
I'm not
Yeah.
talking about copying what they're doing. I'm talking about that was provided just to see what others are doing, I think.
Right.
I don't think anybody asked for that, but what I'm talking about is supporting this volunteer activity that's going on at our lake associations so that the district can participate in this and help with the fundraising that's needed to do whatever activities the lake associations have decided to do.
Right now, though, the only thing the Lake Association does is Eurasian water milfoil, because we've decided not to do that. Everything else is covered by the watershed.
Well, then that's what it is, but it might be something else in the future. So
Why would we change it though, Jackie? Because we have complete control now. We have the utmost confidence of the DNR because of the quality of the work we've done with the lake associations. And even when they do it on their own, the DNR trusts them. But I don't think we want to turn this over to the lake associations when people aren't.
I don't think that's what Jackie's proposing. She's proposing adding a grant program for the treatment of Eurasian water milfoil for the 3 lake associations in the district, and all the rest of the AIS program would remain unchanged.
Okay.
We're not gonna turn over the treatment for you know, the purple, all the other things that we do. We're going to still do the delineations. We're still going to do the AIS program the way we do it. I guess I didn't hear Jackie saying we were going to give it all over to the Lake Association. So,
well, I was a little confused myself where that was coming from, but thank you for the clarification. If that's what you're interpreting, Steve, that was not it at all.
Okay, I was confused.
Everything maintains the way it is. It's an add-on where the district, where we haven't taken any action on Eurasian milfoil in the past, it is still a threat to our lakes and a problem for our lakes. And this would be our way to assist in that lake association activity by providing these grants for them to continue their programs.
Well, you know, we did this before. Before this, we used to pay for all of it. And then it was decided, because that Eurasian water milfoil was more of a recreational as opposed to a water quality issue, that maybe we let the lake associations take care of it themselves under our guidance and control.
Well, the discussion didn't end there though, because it's mentioned even in our current 10-year plan, recreational value of the lakes is a high priority.
Okay.
And we've had that discussion, and I thought that was all settled and done with. But now what's coming out is the economic impact of Eurasian milfoil on property values on a lake. So it has a wider range of impacts than just phosphorus.
Right. It's beyond just phosphorus.
And
why don't we just take it over again then, and then just?
No, I don't think that's necessary. I think Comfort Lake's got a fairly robust program that they're developing and they're the people who understand where the problems are, the Lake Association itself. They see where the EWM is a problem, but they're spending all of the money themselves. And if we could provide them a grant to assist their efforts, then I think that's going to move them ahead and let them keep their program intact. And I think Bone Lake could have a similar type program, and Forest could as well. And so I agree with Jackie. I think there's a place for this grant. It's not taking over the program. It's not directing the program. It's providing, it's like all the other grants that we would have provided for any of our programs. But this allows us to scale it by the size of the lake association. And I'm not sure if we want to go strictly by acreage. I like the idea of the littoral area being used, because that's typically where the problems are dealt with. They're not normally dealt with in the deep part of the lake. So if you have a lot of littoral area, maybe that's important to you. But at any rate, I think it's okay if we just have staff continue to work on developing a potential grant program with some of these attributes that we've talked about tonight. Does that make sense to Jackie and Steve? Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I guess I can agree with that, as long as we maintain control of the delineation, so we know that, you know, right now, like on Forest Lake with milfoil, the district pays for the delineation So we know exactly what's being done and where it's being done, and the DNR knows that also. And then we also have a follow-up evaluation of it, so we know exactly how effective our money has been. So I can live with that. What I guess I don't want us to get into is thinking about getting a grant program for areas that are within the 150 feet of the shoreline. And I don't think we want to start getting into that. At least on Forest Lake. I mean, maybe we can, I know a lot of your issues are within 150 feet on the smaller lakes like Comfort, and that's not going to cost us very much money. But if you open that up to Forest Lake, let me tell you, you're going to have a bill you don't even want to look at.
Well, that's
But
why
we're
it's,
not paying-
that's why it's limited. But on the other hand, you do have different depths at different distances from the shore on every lake. Nothing's the same.
Right.
So
Right, and
I
I
don't
agree,
know-
Jackie.
I don't know the length from shore where we get into, 5-6 foot depths on Bone Lake, but Forest or Comfort Lake, that happens pretty regularly.
Yeah.
So,
And I like your idea about just it's a limited program. It's a grant program.
yeah,
It's not going to pay for all of the area of the lake that's within 150 feet of the shore. There isn't enough money to pay for that. But we can help the Lake Association to do more than they can do today, perhaps.
yes. And I don't want to put too many restrictions on it because every lake is different.
Right.
And as long as they're staying inside the guidelines of the DNR, all I know is that the DNR is giving a lot more acreage to the Comfort Lake Association to treat than they ever did to the watershed district.
Right.
And I don't know why that is, because the delineations are done by Steve McComas, as they always have been, but they don't double check when the Lake Association is submitting that same data.
Right.
And I know when we were doing it, they would always want to come out and double check our submission for some reason. I don't know why that happened, but it doesn't happen with our Lake Association. And I don't
Yeah,
think it happens with the Bone Lake Association either.
Right. It seems like the delineation is accepted, and
Yeah.
I think they're beginning to trust the Lake Association, at least on Comfort, to do the right thing. Just like they did on Big Marine, I think, the DNR became comfortable with the
Right.
skill of the applicators. And so,
Right.
but yeah, I think we ask staff to go off and with some things that we discussed this evening, and come back to us with a grant program, a grant plan that we could talk about. So.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't take too long. It would be nice to implement that this year so that we have a good, it's just good PR. It's a good program, but it's also really good PR. I know that there's been disappointment that we haven't helped with this type of activity at the local Lake Association levels, not just on Comfort, but all through the district. And this is a good way to show them that we do support the activities of our lake associations.
We do. We're helping, but we can't take it all on ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
So would this be coordinated by the Lake Association? So for example, right now, the Lake Association coordinates it on Forest Lake. But suppose, let's go to Comfort Lake, for example. Suppose now you had the Lake Association opening it up to all the various individual property owners. And so every property owner gets their own license and gets their own applicator. And we're paying now costs that are extremely high because it's been done on such a small scale and only piecemeal, as opposed to doing a lake-wide delineation and only treating the areas that have to be treated.
This is a program for the lake associations,
Right.
not for
Right.
the individual people.
Okay.
Right.
So
Right.
they're coordinated by the Lake Association as an organization.
And the grant has to be applied for. There needs to be a written application that says
Oh, yeah.
what they're going to do, how they're going to do it. It's not just, we want $5,000 and we'll just figure out what we're going to do with it. They
No.
need to apply for the grant. and
Yeah.
be
Well, I
approved.
think the whole program has to be run by a pre and a post delineation done by Steve McComas, which we would pay for. And then we would offer the treatment costs of some type of a grant to cover whatever treatment costs there's based upon the littoral areas, as Jackie was talking about. What I
Well,
don't
and
want
that's-
to see is getting every little property owner cutting their own 15-foot squatch out to the open water.
Nope.
No, and that's never been proposed. This is
Yeah,
for
but-
the associations as a community organization, if you will.
Right, right. And they have.
And
can
right
see
now,
it happen.
we are doing the delineations for all of our lake associations.
Right.
Okay, so we have enough dialogue on this. Why don't we have staff put together a recommendation and then we can be very specific about what we like and don't like about the
Mhm.
recommendation.
It
So
should
we
be very
cover a
simple.
broad area here. I'm okay with it, but I just want to see some controls on it. And I don't want this thing to open up to be available to every property owner to do their own little thing for their beach and everything
No one
else.
ever mentioned individual
Yeah.
property owners but you.
Yeah, no,
So-
we're not going that way.
It wasn't introduced.
I can see the way it's going. I've been
It
around a
wasn't-
long
it wasn't
time.
Only in your mind. It wasn't introduced that way.
No,
Yes.
I
It
see
wasn't-
it on our lake.
It wasn't proposed that way, so
Yeah.
I think we got it. Okay,
When we had the harvester, they used to call the president up and want us to come out and personally do their dock, with the harvester. So instead of using the harvester, they're just gonna use our money to do it.
Mike and Blaine, did you have any questions for us that we haven't laid out enough information about?
I think I have sufficient information to help staff. I think Garrett will be the one leading the drafting
Oh, sorry.
of this. Yeah.
I meant Garrett.
Yep. I know they look so similar. So
Well, they're right on top of each other right here in my view. So
siblings or something, yeah.
they're brothers,
so-
yeah.
But yeah, no, I think it's fine. I guess, yeah, I'll maybe have one comment and then we'll leave it at that. But from my experience with cost sharing, if it's set up so the recipient can get more than 50%, then it becomes the government's program and not their own. So that would be maybe the one caveat would be to have it structured in such a way that it would be a match up to a certain dollar amount, and that the district would never pay more than 50%.
I like it.
that's fine.
Yep, I'm okay with that. We're only helping, we're not doing the whole thing. That's not the idea. So, and we don't want to overhelp. It is possible to overhelp, so let's not do that. All right, any other discussion on this question? All right, then let's move on to the Parsons Wetland Cattail Harvest Report.
President Manager, this Blaine is going to cover this one again, please.
All right, take it away, Blaine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Jessica, could you please bring up the presentation? Mr. President, managers, I just wanted to take a few minutes and share with you the results from the feasibility study on the proposed cattail harvest on Parsons Wetland. First slide. Or next slide. So the objective of the study was to determine the feasibility, cost, and any benefits of a cattail harvest within Parsons Wetland. And this would be for a mechanism to remove phosphorus from that system. We would be looking at just removing the emergent part of the plant, so not disturbing the soils or roots. In the literature, it suggests that this is a viable way to remove phosphorus from a system. Their literature suggests that about 25 pounds of phosphorus per acre can be harvested, removed through a cattail harvest. And this could translate to 27 to 66% phosphorus load reduction. This study is just looking at the amount that we could remove through a cattail harvest, not looking at any depletion from the soils or a reduction in load. That was outside of the scope of this study. The cattail harvest in the Parsons Wetland was identified in the 2018 Hayward Avenue subwatershed analysis. And we do have some data from that subwatershed analysis. We did some soil cores throughout the wetland, and they identified that the phosphorus levels within those wetland soils were elevated, but they were not, they were at the higher part of the normal range for a wetland. They were in the around 500 parts per billion, which average normal a wetland would be 250 to 550. So in the upper part of that, that range, compared to say the Moody wetland that we did the excavation work on, that had phosphorus levels well over 1,000. So quite a bit more. So that's why we're proposing to the cattail harvest was proposed in this wetland as opposed to any sort of excavation. Next slide, please. So for those of you that are not familiar, the Parsons wetland is located east of First Lake. There are 2 city-owned parcels within that wetland complex. The city of Forest Lake owned parcels are approximately 10.5 acres in total, with about 8 acres of that being wetland. It's considered a public waterway, a DNR public waterway, and is referred to by the DNR as a Parsons wetland. We did approach the city about doing cattail harvest on their parcels in 2020, and they did agree to grant us permission to access and do a harvest. So we have that in our back pocket if we do want to pursue something in the future. And again, we would just be removing the emergent part of the plant, which in this particular wetland, it is a monoculture of hybrid cattails. So the narrow leaf hybrids, non-native species that we'd be going in and removing. Next slide, please. So the mechanism for the removal of phosphorus is breaking the nutrient cycle. So as the plant grows, it takes nutrient from the soil, uses that to grow the leaf material. In the winter or in fall, the plant would senesce, that would send all the energy that it produces, all the nutrient back down to the root system for overwintering. The leaf material would die and be recycled into the wetland. We're proposing to break that litter fall part of the mechanism or of the nutrient cycle, removing the plant material when it's got its peak phosphorus levels, which is in early August. So we would come in, remove the material, take that out of the wetland. It would not be allowed to, the plant would not be allowed to take that material and put it back down in the root system or have those nutrients recycled through decomposition. And again, this has been shown in the literature as an effective means of removing phosphorus from a system. It's a couple studies here on the right, and then there's also some studies that have been done in Canada that have really focused in on the cattail harvest as a mechanism for removing phosphorus. Next slide, please. So the feasibility study was conducted on August 6th of 2020. District staff went out into a Parsons wetland and we looked at 5 1-square-yard plots. Those are distributed throughout the wetland to try to get a good representation of the vegetation, cattail vegetation in that wetland. So at each 1-yard plot, we removed all material from all emergent cattails from that plot. We then weighed the material, and so we got a wet weight, and then we took 5 subsamples of those cattails and sent them to the UNM Research Analytical Lab for analysis. They looked at dry weight, percent moisture, and then did a 15-element panel on those cattails. Next slide, please. So some results here. The average weight of cattails per 1 square yard was approximately 3.5 pounds. If we extrapolate this out for the entire wetland, it's a lot of material, 57 tons, thereabouts. So a lot of material in that wetland. The average phosphorus content was 0.2% by weight, or 4.5 pounds per ton of harvested wet cattail material. This equates approximately 39 pounds of phosphorus per acre of cattails harvested. And if we extrapolate that out to the total of around 8 acres of wetland cattails within the wetlands, over 250 pounds for the entire wetland. So these are just estimates of the total amount of phosphorus removed when you harvest the cattails. It's not an estimation of reduction of phosphorus from the soil, nor any export of phosphorus load from the system. As again, we're outside of the scope of the of this feasibility study. And if we compare the 39 pounds that we found to the approximately 25 from the literature estimates, we're well exceeding what we see in the literature. That could be due just to the density of the cattails within this monoculture. They're very dense and very tall in some areas. So that could explain some of that differentiation from what was found in the literature. Next slide, please.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
Do you know whether the cattails in Canada that were the subject to the literature were the same type? Because these, I understand, I've been told, are all invasive cattails. There are very few native cattails left in Minnesota. So that might mean it's a much more dense and higher and thicker plant than what might be going on in Canada. I don't know whether you were
Could very
able
well
to
be.
check that or not.
Yeah, I don't recall. It's been a while since I've reviewed those articles, but
Okay.
that could be a factor. So part of the study was also to look at the logistics of harvesting that entire approximately 8-acre wetland. We looked at crews that would be needed, any sort of machinery that would be needed to just remove that vast amount of material, almost 60 tons, and then removal, taking it off to a place to dispose of. We called around and found a couple crews that could potentially do this type of work. Because it is a wet wetland, we don't control the hydrology of the wetland. We'd have to go in there by hand and do hand harvesting. In some of the Canadian studies, they were actually able to manipulate the hydrology of the wetland, dry it out, and take farm equipment in there and use balers and whatnot to harvest the material, bale it up, and get it out of there. So much more efficient. This wetland, when we went and did the feasibility the plots, it was actually knee deep in areas of water. So we'd have to do it all by hand. So we need some crews. We identified 2 crews that could potentially assist. It was the Conservation Corps of Minnesota and Iowa, and then the Minnesota Department of Corrections. They've got an institutional community work crew that we could hire. We estimated around 12 days with a crew of 6 to 8. Based on their rates, it was around $20,000 just to harvest and stack the material. What we propose to do would be go in by hand, cut everything with weed whackers and other tools, pile them up in strategic areas, and then after freeze, we'd get an excavator to go in there, grab that material, track it over to the road, load dump trucks, and then dispose of it. So we'd be kind of a multi-phase project here. So we'd have an excavator with mobility charges. We estimate around 24 hours or $9,000 for that with a mobility and a operator. And then the haul, we need a couple of dump trucks servicing that excavator. Approximately 100 loads for that quantity of material, around 20 grand just for the haul. We did not incorporate any disposal fees here. We've got several agricultural fields that we rent where we could take that material, compost it, and then after it's composted, spread it on the field to improve the soil quality. Or we could potentially take some of the material to the city compost site. So those costs were not included. Total cost was estimated at around $50,000 for the entire 8-acre wetland. Next slide, please. So we've got logistics fairly figured out, although we don't fully understand the potential load reduction from the cattail harvest. How does this translate into load to Forest Lake? So what we're proposing is a multi-year cattail harvest of around 1 acre or maybe less, and then an associated study of the phosphorus reduction from that cattail harvest. So we remove 2, 3, 4 years, 1 acre within that wetland, that same acre likely, and then test those soils within the wetland to see if we're actually depleting phosphorus. So there'd be a series of wetland soil cores. We'd be testing those soils for phosphorus level, look at the pore water, the groundwater within that wetland, and then also discharge or inputs and discharge from the wetland, grab samples and testing those to see, are we reducing the amount of phosphorus discharge from that wetland environment? Are we depleting the soils enough so that they have capacity to deal with or treat additional inputs of phosphorus into the system? The cost of a study like this, if we were to hire crews, excavators, additional machinery, and the monitoring, would be around $10,000 per year. It's a rough estimate. If we were to scale the project down a little bit and get volunteers or staff and assistance from the city, I did reach out to Dave Adams with the city, and they said they would be interested in discussing the project and potentially assisting if it was just a 1 or 2 day type of a program here. If we were to get all those people together, all those pieces together, we could potentially do this for quite a bit cheaper, harvest 1 acre or less, and then have the city assist. So we could do the study for a little bit more and determine the actual feasibility or the actual reduction in load that we could have from a harvest of this nature. One thing to mention is that study would be best be done in dry conditions, basically because we don't want to disturb the soils with all the foot traffic and send a plume of sediment, phosphorus-laden sediment downstream into Forest Lake. So we either need to wait for dry periods, which timing might be tricky because ideally you harvest early August, or we'd have to put in some pretty secure erosion control measures at that outflow to make sure that we're not sending a plume downstream. So those are things to consider. Another thing also to consider is that there is permitting required for this. So we need a permit from the DNR to harvest this material. So that can take up to, I believe, 120 days to get in place. So those are additional things to consider. So with that, I can happy to answer any questions, and I would look for some direction from the board on whether we should, pursue this additional study, the multi-year harvest and study of nutrient depletion. So with that, happy to answer any questions, or interested to see how the board is leaning or thinking about this.
So just one question about the area, Blaine, is there a 1 acre section of that wetland that would be advantageous to work in? Is there an area that's less wet than the rest of the wetland? Someplace where we could have a better chance of success at doing a 1 acre plot, I guess, is my big question.
Yeah, I've only been actually in the wetland once, but what I found was that the area nearest to the outflow was the deeper water. As you moved away from it, it got more solid ground. So I guess I would suggest that we do something that's within the proximity of the outflow, but on solid ground, so that we're not mucking things up. But it's a load goes through that well, and it's naturally going to go towards the outflow, and I would imagine those soils would have the highest amount of phosphorus in them, and that would be where we'd want to do the test to see how much we're depleting from those soils. But
That
again,
makes
we got to
sense.
weigh that, the logistics of the actual harvest itself.
Right, okay. Other questions for Blaine?
Well, I live right across from the wetland, and I can tell you that it's dry most of the summer. And so, in fact, when you were out there, Blaine, I think that's the highest it's probably ever been, because there was a lot of rain last summer. And you guys had a tough time. I thought you guys were never going to come out of that area, because you kind of disappeared. But a question I have is, should a wetland ever dry out? I'm questioning the leveling of the pipe that was put in how many decades ago. And if you raise the pipe, it left more water in there, would there be less cattails growing, et cetera, et cetera? Because you're going to redo that road, and I don't know what the natural level of that wetland was originally, but should a wetland dry out like that? I mean, right now, the wetland's almost dry. I went over there, looked, and there's just a little bit of snow in that left by the outlet. And normally, at this time of year, once the pipe unfreezes, it runs all the way through probably to the 1st of June before that wetland dries. But we have had such little snow this year that, mostly you can walk right out there and it's dry right now, except a little bit of snow on the ground. So it's pretty amazing. So I think you could find a dry spot to do it during the summer. But can anybody answer the question about whether a wetland should ever dry out or not? Or is that natural or normal?
So maybe I can jump in here. So I think, that wetland, has been altered over time and drained. It would be nice to hold more water in that wetland area. However, if you look at the property ownership, once you get past the City of Forest Lake parcels, there's a whole bunch of subdivided parcels out in the middle of that wetland that are owned by various people. So it would be a huge effort in order to either purchase or get easements on all those properties to allow you to, kind of put that wetland back in a wetter state. So I think that's a very good point, Steve, that, yeah, it would be nice if we could keep that wetland a little wetter and not have that water discharging to Forest Lake. But there's just some logistical issues with trying to do that.
Which brings up another question. I noticed the plotting out there. In fact, some of my neighbors were telling me that most of it's plotted out. What can people actually build in there if they wanted to? I mean, there's even roads laid out in the plot lines, if you see there. Why would they sell wetland like that if it can't be developed?
Well, I'm sure the people that bought those at that time were wondering that same question. A lot of times back in the day, they would just plot things out ahead of time without really understanding the conditions. And, back then, people could have came in and filled in or built if they wanted to, but now with, the current wetland laws, that would be very difficult to do, unless there's some slivers of upland out there. So I don't foresee that there's ever going to be a road and houses built in there, but the way it was platted out and sold, it makes for kind of a mess now.
Where's the culvert that you're talking about, Steve? Is it on the road or where is it?
It's, if you put that map back on, it's right at the bottom of the hill here. Put the map back up there again.
I believe that's slide 3.
It was at FL 21
Yeah.
site.
It's right where that yellow dot, the yellow dot, if you go 15 feet to the left of that dot, that's kind of where that's where the hill starts to go up, and that's where the culvert pipe is. Right there. Yeah. And it's after being on the city for about 5 years, they finally put in 2 big reflective signs to protect the outlet so people don't dump stuff on it anymore. When they wanted to dig it out, they could never find it. So I convinced them that they'd be cheaper to put in two markers. So.
Is that maintained by the city? So that's
Yeah, because it blocks up all the time and they have to come out and dig it out.
Okay.
So
Well, that was the issue. That was the issue with Shallow Pond, back in the
Yep.
late 90s. A
Right.
development went in and the culvert was actually inverted. And so
Now
that
there's
was-
about 6 or 7 other culverts that drain that wetland all the way along, all the way around Hayward Avenue, but they're all crushed down and covered up and blocked. So this is the only one that runs, and that's why it takes, probably 2 months if there's a lot of snow for that wetland to drain with that only, I think it's about an 8-inch pipe. So it's really undersized if you're trying to drain that out fast. In fact, last spring it was up so high, it was starting to encroach on the road. And that's because it was blocked, and I had to call them to come out and open it up again.
My point is that because this was an issue that Wyoming Township had a number of years ago, that might be something to look at before we spend a lot of time and money on a cattail harvest study. And I'm not saying that that's not a good idea, but it's questionable to me because there's so many caveats in that report about not understanding, what the true impact on the soil is going to be or the output to the lake is going to be. So how do we make certain that what we're doing has value at the other end for implementation projects?
Well,
So
my
that's
my concern was that Megan had mentioned a while back that when a wetland dries out and it gets wet again, it can become a phosphorus pump. And so I don't know whether we've ever done any sampling. If you're sampling in the spring, it hasn't dried out over the winter. But if you sample after it dries out, then sample after the next rain, then you can see how much phosphorus, if any, are coming off that wetland. So I was concerned that it could be a lot of damage being done because of the wet, dry cycles all summer long. Every time it rains, it fills up and then drains out, dries out, and then the next rain comes and you got the same cycle going again. So that was a concern to me. But you don't know until you do that monitoring, I guess.
Yep. I definitely think there could be some of that. To address Jackie's question, I think the value of this is that this truly is a research type project where, I think this technique could be used in many different places where we have large stands of cattails. And if we do find that this is an effective practice at reducing loading downstream, then it could be used elsewhere. So I guess I think it's definitely a worthwhile thing to pursue. And, if we can get some volunteers, Forest Lake Association, I'd even consider rounding up some EOR employees to volunteer just to, give it a try for a few years and really try to understand what's going on out there and see if there is indeed benefits to cattail harvesting.
I didn't hear are we going to replace the harvested cattails with native cattails or just not replace it at all?
So the idea is you'd want those to keep growing each year. And
Mhm.
so each time you cut those, you're removing phosphorus from the system because the phosphorus is going up in the cattails. Hopefully eventually you deplete the soils so much that cattails are no longer viable. And then you could come in with more native plants that don't need that high phosphorus content.
So that would be the goal eventually, would be to replant with native species?
Yep, and I think we had discussed that at a previous board meeting. I think one of the managers mentioned that. Could we convert it to something else once we're done? And I think, yeah, that would hopefully be the idea.
Actually, as the cattails die back, some natives will pretty naturally fill back in anyway. It's just that you'll also get some other invasives like, the grass that's so crazy that it will take over everything. So, we do have to be careful of what comes in afterwards, but they will die back and they will eventually disappear if we are in fact removing phosphorus from the system and getting it down below a critical level.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, John. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of seed bank in there of native plants. So,
Right.
if the cattails truly become non-viable, then other things would start to pop up.
Yeah, I had that happen here. I stopped cutting down to the lake and sedges came in that had probably been there all along, but the previous owner had mowed them all down and planted bluegrass down there. And then when that seed bank came back, it came back strong and it took over. It actually pushed out the grasses that were in there. So it's a pretty hardy plant. So I don't know if there's sedges in there, but whatever there is, it'll come and try. It'll try to take over again. But cool. Any other questions for Blaine?
Manager Pence,
Yes.
may I ask a question?
Mhm.
This is an extension maybe of Manager Anderson's question, but it seems that there is a separate research question identified in the report as to what the amount of phosphorus removed in plant matter would correspond to as far as the downstream impact, which may depend on whether the wetland is one that wet-dry cycles and other characteristics of the wetland. And it seems even if removing the cattails produces an extraordinary amount of phosphorus removal, that may mean nothing if for that particular setting, that phosphorus isn't going to make its way down gradient anyway. So I'm just wondering if it's a research question that could be researched productively to determine under what circumstances this type of phosphorus removal would be useful for reducing loadings downstream, whether that's something to look at first or at least in conjunction with a larger test plot type field experiment.
Yeah. Could the test results be confounded by something else that's already going on in that system that would fake us out, basically, is the concern.
That's why I thought it's important to do some sampling after the dry cycle. It gets wet all summer long. Do that, and if nothing's getting into the lake anyway, the way it is, don't do the study because it's not going to have any impact, right? Obviously. So if you do that first, then you can decide whether if we see a lot of stuff coming in after it dries out, then it tells us that it's probably worthwhile doing something. But you'd have your measurements, you'd have your concentrations, you'd have your flow, and you could do those normal calculations that you guys do when you do your monitoring. So,
do we have much data at that spot already?
I think only in the spring. I think we did some testing one spring, but that's, like I say, it's been wet all winter, and then if you test it now, it's still wet. You gotta do it during your summer after rains, after it dries out. And like I say, it almost always drains out. And then once it drains, it dries, and until it's not refilled until you get a pretty good 3/4 or 1 inch rain that fill it up again. So
maybe it'd be worthwhile to establish a baseline with some measurements.
That's why I was thinking, that's why I asked the question earlier about putting a monitoring station there, or at least having me run over there and take the samples after it dries out and you get a rain. Why don't you show me how to
So
do it?
I know we did do monitoring out there for at least 1 year, and that's where, we kind of did this Hayward study area, and there was an estimated load coming out of this pipe location, and it was significant enough that we did think that some sort of
Okay.
project should be looked at in this area. So that's how we kind of got to this point.
Well, good, then we
Oh.
know. I didn't have time to go back and search for that information, so,
I do have those numbers if you're interested.
okay. So if you know that, then it's probably worthwhile to try something then.
So we've got data for the entire R15 drainage, so that includes this wetland, but it's a greater area. So 104 total acres, annual flow is 45 acre feet per year. Total phosphorus, 335 parts per billion with an annual load at 40.6 pounds per year. It was estimated that this was 9% of the total load entering into Forest Lake from this R15 subwatershed.
Okay.
Well, it's smaller compared to some of the others, but
Right.
I think for me, the question that should be addressed first is what man-made impacts have altered this wetland, because it's clearly not what it was pre-development. So if we've got culverts that are crushed or are inverted or not functioning properly or shouldn't be there anymore, why aren't we looking at that first so that we can eliminate all of those alteration impacts before we do anything?
And the city probably will do that when they redo the road, because they're gonna see that those culverts were put in before the last engineering effort. They're probably gonna replace them. But the question is, at what elevation then do you put them? Do you want to put it back to natural? And I think Greg is right. I don't want to see that thing being 3 feet deep all the time, because my sump pump will never stop running. Being across the road from it, so.
Well, but it was at one point in time, there were multiple culverts crossing under Hayward Avenue, and
Right.
when they redo Hayward Avenue, as you said, they probably will restore the culverts that were there, so. Which
You'd
would,
think so.
which should drain it more rapidly, right?
Right.
Should keep it
Right.
drier than wetter. It's sort of unnaturally stopped up right now so that it will get wetter and it bounce more, and I don't know. Greg, what do you think? What do you think would happen if they redid Hayward? Would they reset all those culverts and fix them all?
Yeah, I'm sure they're going to go in and do an inventory of what culverts are out there and replace them if they're crushed. I think the wetland all kind of naturally drains up to that one point right now. But yeah, I guess I was aware that there were some other culverts under there, but it seems like that's kind of the main discharge point right now. Obviously when we review that permit, we'll want to make sure that they're not somehow adversely affecting that wetland. But I think, it's kind of what's your baseline of what's the original condition. I mean, the original condition back when those culverts were there, or back before there wasn't anything at all. Back before there wasn't anything at all, there probably was a sand beach ridge there, and probably that wetland hardly discharged at all would be my guess.
Yeah.
But again, it's putting it back to that state, blocking up the culvert or putting a riser pipe is very complicated with
John,
the property owner.
Mike's got a
It
couple
is.
of messages that you might want to read.
Yep. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just noting for the group that they, so there's a ditch through this system that goes north and south, or from the north to the south, discharges on Hayward and to the south there. The landowner where that ditch goes through, his father, he's not retired, he lives just to the north, but his father is the one that put that ditch system in. So yes, it is a little bit more complicated. It's not just that culvert by Manager Schmaltz's house that drains that wetland complex. So
Mike, I think you're thinking of a different site that's further to the east. I believe what you have circled there is actually a trail.
It's a road or a trail, right?
Is it?
I was trying to figure out what it was. I saw it on the, it looks more like a trail than a
Oh,
ditch.
that's a high ridge, and they run their four-wheelers back in there all the time, especially in the wintertime. So I think it never
Okay.
does grow back, but that's a high ridge, and you have a lot of deer up in there. Doesn't always get wet up there.
I know which
Okay.
ditch you're talking about, Mike, but that's on a wetland that's to the east of here.
All right. Thanks for clarifying.
I can tell you I think everything from the road to the lake is filled in. Because when I dig in my yard to plant a tree, if I go down about 3 feet, it goes from regular dirt to this black, like wetland dirt, it's like mucky dirt. So I think that whole thing was filled in, and when they put the road through there on both sides to a certain extent. And you can see it. Sometimes the road, there's almost nothing. It just goes right up to the wetland where they stop the fill.
I guess the bottom line question is, do we want to do a research project in this area? And do we have enough information to know what the result of that project would be? It sounds like we're having some mixed results on feeling confident with that spending $10,000 a year might not tell us much. What do you think, Greg and Blaine? How do you feel about it?
Well, the literature does suggest that there could potentially be a reduction in load. Those, were done in under, hydraulically controlled circumstances. So we do have that factor with the fluctuations of water within this wetland. I think we could accomplish it for quite a bit less, for quite a less amount if we were to use volunteers and get assistance from the city. So I think that $10,000 price tag could come down and be primarily just the soil cores and then the analysis of the water grab samples and whatnot. So it could be done relatively inexpensively, but it would have to be repeated several years to kind of tease out some of the fluctuations of the water levels within the wetland. I think it's interesting from a research standpoint, and it could be, if it proved to be effective, could be applied throughout the district under certain circumstances. I mean, there's a lot of wetland in the district, so if it proved successful and as a good mechanism for removal of phosphorus, it could be something that we could deploy throughout the basin.
I guess I'm still a little bit concerned about the control condition here, that if we don't understand what's normally, normal is a hard word in a natural science setting, but if we don't understand what's going through that pipe on a typical year, and we change something, we won't know anymore. We don't have a control. We don't have an effective control to know that we impacted the results. It could just be a natural variation of a wet year versus a dry year. And so if we could establish a better feeling that we know what the characteristic of that discharge point is, then we at least feel like, okay, we've kind of got a control point. Now we can go alter the system upstream of that and see if we've affected the outflow. And so maybe we take a couple of years to monitor that pipe and collect more data, and then move forward with a harvesting program, unless another site comes up in the interim that works better, or that we have more information about. I just hate to see us, and it's not even the $10,000 a month that I would be afraid of spending. It's are we going to get the result we're trying to get, or are we just going to be more confused in the end when we collect all the data?
Well, the other issue is next year or the year after, they're going to change that road around, and they're going to put in more culverts. It's going to change the whole thing again.
Yeah.
The flow out. Would we be better off spending that money when they do the road to go? There's a lot of stuff that's been dumped in there for over the years to clean out along the shoreline and get all that stuff taken out. That might have a better impact on water quality than the cattails, because I mean, I have pictures from last year. There's just years and years of leaves being dumped in there and trash and logs, and it's quite a mess. So I mean, if you cleaned all that out as you were doing the construction, it might have a pretty big impact on the lake. We had a lot of that in Third Lake Pond, didn't we, Mike, too? A lot of stuff on the shoreline. We had to dig
Yeah,
out.
Right, they took out dump truck loads. I mean, and we see the same on the south side. I mean, this is a program we've talked about. You know, we started the signage piece to try to inform residents that, you know, not to dump their waste. You know, we put those out last fall in partnership with the lake associations. But you're right. I think, you know, on some of these sites, it would not be unlikely that we could, you know, extract the 30, 50 plus loads of material that have been dumped over the years. I think on Third Lake Pond, I can't remember the number that they had to haul out of there, but it was pretty substantial.
Yeah, I'd be hesitant to go forward with I love the idea of doing this experiment. I just don't know if this is the site that makes the most sense to do it right now. And maybe we keep our eyes open for another site that has some good characteristics that would allow us to do that cattail harvest experiment somewhere else. And I don't know how the rest of the board feels, but I'd be concerned if the road's going to change in a couple of years anyway, then our whole experiment blows up in our face because all the conditions change and we don't even know where we started and where we're going to end up. So
I tend to agree with that. And I think I'd rather spend the money on cleaning up when the time is right as much as we can.
Sure.
And maybe there's another site we could find, but
yeah, let's keep our eyes out. What do you think, Jackie?
Well, that's what I stated earlier.
Yeah.
There's too many unknowns right now to move forward with this, in my opinion. And there's too many man-made impacts, alterations that we haven't looked at, and we should do that first.
Okay.
I think when the road goes in, we should be ready to move in concert with the city for those things that we want to see improved
Yeah, there you go.
or cleaned up, or, you know, whatever, identified as problems that need to be corrected. Maybe that's a better way to put it. And so we should be working with the city now so that we're on that coordinated schedule. And if we need to do research, that's the research that should be done now, in my opinion. And maybe that corrects the wetland soils and it heals itself over time. Or maybe we have to go in there and take out the invasive species, the non-native species, and allow the native species to take over. That makes more sense to me. There were just too many qualifiers in the report to make me comfortable that the outcome was going to have any impact on water quality.
Right. No, I thought the report was great. It was very informative. It was well done. I thought the work was well done. I just agree that this area just seems to have a lot of balls in the air, and it's really hard to pin them down. So,
well, and that's what
makes
makes
it work.
And that's what makes it a good report. It was honest.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
And that's what we need.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Blaine. I appreciate the work that you put in and staff. So this was very helpful to us. So.
It was my pleasure, and I appreciate the conversation we had here. You all brought up some really good points, and I think your decision is the correct one for sure.
Okay. Anything else on this topic? Oh, we have topic F now. And I forgot what that topic is. Emily?
Sure, Mr. President Manager. Before we move on, did you want to approve the harvest feasibility report, and then we'll get it posted to the website?
Yes. That was an action we needed to take.
I'll make a motion to approve the harvest, what'd you call it? Preliminary report?
Harvest feasibility report.
There we go, feasibility report.
and I'll second that.
All right, motion been made and seconded. Any other discussion? I'll call the question. Manager Anderson?
Aye.
Manager Smaltz?
Aye.
Manager Spence? Aye. Yes, Once again, thanks Blaine, and thanks everyone, all the staff who worked on it. That was good work. All right, Emily, back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for adding this to the agenda at the last minute. So we've been awarded 2 Clean Water Fund grants for this fiscal year. We've been working as always with our board conservationist, Dan Fabian, through the work plans, and we had our usual pre-work plan meeting. This time around, there are some additional requirements for the Little Comfort grant. That one's got multiple components. It has the east wetland impoundment. It has channel improvements and an alum treatment in Little Comfort Lake. It is also, of the 2 grants, the only one that is above $200,000. Because of that dollar threshold, there's some additional kind of oversight that Dan needs to have from his supervisor. So kind of with that, and some of these are new this year, some new Bowser requirements. And that one is this motion that we have in front of you. Bowser wants the board to make this pledge, basically assuring that we have the systems in place to maintain the project in the long run. That's why I said in the memo, it's kind of stuff that we already do anyway, especially as we're looking at the 10-year plan and budgeting out our O&M program. So this motion really is just kind of laying it out explicitly. And I've worked back and forth with Dan Fabian on what this language is. So this should be a good step 1. And then at the next meeting, we'll bring back an agreement that is another new one that we haven't had to do before. That is an agreement between the district and Bowser to ensure the alum treatment, which I think is a bit more complex, but we can get to it at that time. So just before you is the proposed motion for now.
Any questions for Emily on the motion?
I'll make the motion to approve the O&M assurance for the Clean Water Fund grant as presented.
I'll second.
All right, motion been made and seconded. Any other discussion? I will call the roll. Manager Anderson.
Aye.
Manager Smaltz.
Aye.
Manager Spence. Aye. All right, thanks, Emily. All right, then on to old business. Item A is a demonstration of the interactive timeline. So I assume that's probably you again, Emily.
Yes, it is. Thank you. And I will actually share my screen for this one. So before I do that, just kind of a reminder of the background. As we were going through the plan update, one of the items the board wanted was this historic timeline. There had been some discussion about the level of detail and how many events we could fit in the one that was in the plan. And so that suggestion, I know there's still probably some discussion to be had on the timeline itself, but what we recommend is maybe having a sort of high level one timeline in the plan. That's kind of a 1-pager, and then a link to an online timeline that we can even just update as time goes on, similar to this interactive web map that we've done. And that would be another benefit of it. You can't really fit it all on 1 page, but users can scroll through it. So I actually have 2 options that I want to present to you today. One we had linked before, and I'll share that one first. This one I had actually thought was made through GIS, but actually just the subject is GIS. It's really, the company used this program called Timeline JS to make this timeline. And I think Jessica had found it online, but it's got some good features. It has this kind of scroll bar at the bottom where you can go through the years and kind of skip ahead to wherever time period you're interested in. And then you can click on any one of these and it'll skip right to it. And you've got the image, year, title, and some more info. Or you can just kind of click through manually. And you just see one at a time here, but you've got sort of the preview of them at the bottom. So that's one option that we could do to add even more information to the timeline that we've got going. I worked with EOR on this a little bit, and they had suggested another option was this ArcGIS Experience, which is, again, it kind of has GIS in the term, but it's really not through like a mapping feature. It's kind of a very simple interface, and I've even worked with it a little bit. It's kind of like editing a web page. You can drag and drop boxes and things. And this one would be a bit more customizable. As you can see here, we've already sort of entered some of the items from our historic timeline. You can have that water quality trend piece over on the side. And so this one, you could still fit as many as you want. The drawback, in my opinion, is it's to our knowledge, we still need to look into it, but I don't think you'd be able to have that little preview thing like the other one does, where you can just scroll through the years. It's just, you have to just scroll through the whole thing. But there's a lot more that would be a lot more features would be customizable as far as images, and you can do hyperlinks and even mapping features and stuff. And since this one, again, it's not really in GIS, but it's through GIS. That's probably not the best way to explain it, but I think we could link it more closely with that story map that we had looked into a few years ago. And that's kind of been on our radar to do a little bit more, but just a thing that walks people through. Yeah. So I don't want to talk too much. These are kind of just the little preview of the two options that we have. And so I wanted to let the board discuss and maybe give direction as to where you'd like staff to go from here.
Comments? I like the first one just because I think there's more information presented in a smaller space and it's more navigable. But I don't have a hard feeling one way or the other. I think I like the preview box down below, and I like the fact that we could have a page sort of for each item and have more information, because the items, some of them are longer than fit on the screen, and they have a scroll capability up and down of the actual individual items. So it seems a little more powerful from that perspective, but then it's a lot of information still. So. Steve or Jackie, I don't know if you guys had any feeling.
I think people like pictures. I like pictures, and then you could have, you've got more room on the right-hand side to elaborate and put additional detail about projects and that kind of stuff. I think if you go up and down vertically, I think pictures attract a lot of people and they remember the pictures, and it's pretty impactful when you look at what it looked like with the Indians there and then back down with all that concrete on that last picture, you know, it sends you a pretty quick message about what's happening and why it's a problem. So, and then you could off to the right, you could have your projects over here or whatever else you wanted to have, or you could have maybe that whole thing click open and be a module in itself. I don't know. But people don't like, I mean, people like pictures usually, and so, and you just want to give them a feeling of what this general message is that we're trying to get across too. So anyway.
Jackie, what do you think?
I think I would find a way to combine the two because they each have their own value. This one, to Steve's point, you know, I agree with all of that. I think this is the way to really tell the story, and not just the historic story, but working in the projects, as he said. And that'll come out in my comments. I don't think we have enough pictures of our projects, and we can work those into our plan. So you'll see that in my commentary on that, but it could work here too on the online. This is only for online. So it's not for the manual versions. You can't do this unless it's online. If you go to the other timeline, this one is for the people that want to take a quick look at the timeline, you know, over the years. And so I think, you know, spreading that out over the page on the web would give you most of it. And then I like the ability to scroll it over so that you can see, you don't have to cut anything out. You can add it all. And so you've got the full timeline of what happened without any anything being cut from that history. So I like them both. And I think we can work with them both on our online plan.
Good. Cool. Well, hopefully that helps, Emily.
Okay. So these are two separate programs. If we did them both, it would be kind of a duplication of efforts, but if that's the board's desire to.
I don't know about doing both, but I think taking the best features of both and finding something that would provide us with the same elements in one timeline. I think that's what Jackie was implying.
Gotcha.
Maybe they each have, I don't know how thoroughly you research these, but maybe each one of them have the ability to do a vertical timeline like this one and a horizontal. Because they each serve a purpose.
Yeah, but I think the features of both are attractive, but if we could find something that did all of that in
I'll
one.
talk to you about it afterwards. I can see that you're a little puzzled, Emily, but the value of the horizontal again is not to have all the detail, but to have the short description of what occurred on a specific time, at a specific time. And so you can, it's like reading headlines. You can go through and just read the headlines of what actually happened over time. And then the vertical presentation is the one for those people that want to go in and actually look at the detail of those specific actions.
Unless you could click on the action in the horizontal and then it pops up and opens up and gives you more detail on it.
Well, that's what she says it does right here
Yeah,
above.
Right.
It does. Yeah,
They've
that's what
sort
it
of
is.
just,
And you can just have one that you work on. I'm okay with either one. I think you'll be happy with either one if you've never seen them both. So,
Yeah.
you know, that's kind of the way it is. So just pick one. That horizontal makes more sense, I think, in terms of getting the more detail and having it simplified and then be able to click and opening it up and have more detail in that particular section.
Okay.
Mr. President, managers, my recommendation is that the board in fact does select one version. And then we could always work with some either, university students, they have special projects or things to create the other one through something like that. But I think from a staff standpoint, if we could get direction on one or the other, then because I think the staff has in fact looked at a variety of options, and I think these are the two best ones that they've come up with. So that's my recommendation to the board, is pick the top choice, and then we'll work on the second one based on the same information at some other time, or we'll just continue to see what else is out there. But
yeah,
I vote on the vertical.
the one that's being shown right now.
Yep.
Yep.
This one.
Yep, I'm okay with that one. Let's start there and see where it doesn't work for us, but let's assume that's the way we're going.
Yeah, that way you can look at basically pictures, and then if you have detail on the right of the pictures, like a bracket that comes out, and you have your projects and whatever else you want to put in there for that time period.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that
Absolutely.
too.
I think we can do a lot with this, and we just kept it pretty bare bones. We didn't want to put too
Right.
much time into it until
Yep.
the board had asked for a demonstration. So
Yep.
okay, thank
All
you. Yeah, and if we can go even beyond in the future, that's great, but this seems like a good starting place. So yeah, thank you.
All right. All right. Let's move
Yeah,
on. Oh, yep. Let's move on to the Lower St. Croix One Watershed One Plan discussion. Here we are again.
Yeah, here we are again. Well, at our last meeting, we decided that we were going to present the resolutions for approving or not approving the work plan that's before us. That's the task before us right now. And have you had a chance to look at the language? Can we pull up the resolutions?
I've looked at both of them myself, and I just wanted to make sure that I understood the primary difference is that one says we approve and the other one says we don't approve.
That's about it.
Okay, because
And
everything
we-
else seemed the same.
Yeah, and we referenced the principles that we talked about when we first entered this process that we were concerned about. And that's in the whereases, of course,
Right.
toward the end of the first page, right before you get to the list of names.
Right.
So that was, are we pulling up one of the resolutions?
Yes, there's two a preference?
Not really.
Not really. Whichever
Just,
one.
we'll see them both. If you can do them side by side, that's better, but they say the same thing pretty much.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Seemed pretty straightforward to me, and
Yeah, it
Both of 'em-
basically, it does the policy statement or the principle statement that we talked about. And when we entered this, we had some principles of moving forward that we thought were very, very important. And the use of the clean water funds in particular, that's pretty spelled out in the statute and in the Constitution. And so we wanted to make sure that we were adhering to that. And that's really what they're all about. Does it adhere to those principles or doesn't it?
Yep. And I felt like that the last statement, the be it further resolved statement, it sort of finalized things. It says, look, we're going to continue to work within the partnership to keep advancing these principles, whether we agree or don't agree with the work plan. So it's not changing what we would do or how we would operate going forward, is my understanding of both resolutions. It's just saying that in one case, we would approve the work plan. In the other case, we would decline to approve the work plan.
Mhm. Because it doesn't meet those specific criteria. So it's not the decision on whether to stay in the collaboration or not. We are in the collaboration. This is an activity-based resolution. Do we approve of this work plan or do we not?
Yep. I thought they were well put together, and I'm perfectly happy with what you've developed here, and I know which way I would vote, but I'm not going to try to sway anyone. I just want to say that I think we have what we need to make our statement right here.
Mhm. And I think it's important to also say again that this is, it has no impact on the collaboration moving forward, because the 2/3 necessary for accepting the plan and moving forward with the grant applications was achieved already at the end of February. So this is just our district's response as a partner in the collaboration on whether we thought this work plan was acceptable or not.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think we've spent more time on this in the policy committees even to think about it. So, I mean, how much influence have we had so far, but we want to be in the game here. So I think we should express our views and keep pushing to keep the principles that we're trying to develop. And then maybe we have to do a plan B offline here that actually has some impact on what's going to happen. And we can talk about that later on. Kind of what Mike's been talking about. You know, if we can't get it by going up the channel, we got to go around and start at the top and work down. So
do we
pretty
have
obvious.
Do we have enough consensus here this evening to make a choice and finalize this so that we don't have to come back to it in 2 weeks, or do we want to?
No, I think we're okay. I guess I would move that we accept the disapprove. We disapprove of the plan, but we want to be part of the partnership.
I agree.
We're not addressing that second issue. We already are
No.
part of it. So this is just a no vote on the work plan or a
On the
yes
work
vote
plan.
on the work plan.
But we've done it in a positive way. We've
Yes.
agreed to disagree in a positive way.
I agree.
So
Some- Go ahead, Jackie.
is your motion to approve the no resolution?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Right.
And I'll second that. I agree. I think we do not approve of the work plan.
Okay.
So I'll second it. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Chuck.
question whether we have a resolution number to give to this resolution?
There was apparently there's still some things to be filled in. So yes, do we have a resolution number? We do need one. What was the last resolution we just?
Emily says it's 21-03-01.
So be it. 21-03-01. and we will update the document to reflect the number. Was there something else that needed to be filled in? I can't remember. Oh, the vote table has to be inserted and all that, but yeah, okay. All right. All right, any other discussion? All right, I will call the roll. Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Spence, aye. All right. Whoa, how did we hit summary and approval of board direction already? How did that happen? All right, so I will go to my trusty recorder of board direction. Chuck, did you note anything that I know there's got to be a couple.
Yes, Mr. Chair, board members. There's a number of things relating to the monitoring program. Mr. Kinney will take note of looking for the opportunities to sample between the Comfort Lake Inlet from Little Comfort when they're out doing work in the boat. And staff will look into signage on the buoy between lakes 2 and 3 on Forest Lake. And staff will check as to whether the district has monitored at the outlet of Parsons Wetland and see if that can be added under the CAT monitoring. Staff will look into the question raised by Manager Schmaltz about the benefit of monitoring off of Lake One along the steep slope there. If I got that right, I may not have stated that precisely. And then there'll be clarification on page 2, paragraph 2, regarding the staff hours and where the savings will come from. And then regarding the AIS cost share, staff will develop a prospectus for a possible grant program to bring back to the board. And that's what I have.
Anything else that anyone else noted? All right, I think we have it. Anybody else have any comments before we adjourn this evening?
I think,
All right.
Mr. President, maybe it's already noted, but for the Timber Ridge variance, we were to include that there'd be a non-dyed wood chip component. To add that to the document.
Motion, right? Yeah, add it to the.
Yep.
Yeah, that is part of the action that the board took.
Yep. Okay.
Maybe I could also just clarify one thing. We'll bring back Lower St. Croix One Watershed One Plan to the March 25th meeting so as to give staff direction whether to participate on subcommittees as part of the implementation.
Okay.
Is that correct?
I guess I don't know that we would not want that to happen, but it sounds like something we should discuss at the March 25th meeting to get more detail.
we have some issues to discuss on Mike's time with Lower St. Croix. And that may hopefully be something that we can add to our workshop on the 16th and get that resolved.
Okay, but there is some questions there that do need to be resolved either at the 16th or the 25th meeting then.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Then I believe a motion to adjourn is in order.
First, I would ask John before we get there that Emily, Mike, and Steve and I stay on. We're just trying to set up a date for the work group, Lower St. Croix work group. Okay.
Okay.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Motion been made and seconded. Any other discussion? I'll call the roll. Manager Anderson.
Aye.
Manager Schmaltz.
Aye.
Manager Spence. Aye. We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Right.
Hey, thank you.